What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today's video is from the line. We're going to be hearing from a caller that's decided to call in and try to prove either God to us or some other kind of crazy idea. So, if you want to fuck around and find out how crazy this call gets, then please stay tuned.
Let's get on to something real. David in Missouri is calling. Pronouns are him. He's a questioning theist who wants to explain why he believes in God. So, David, you're on with John and Matt. Which God do you believe in and why? And do you think anybody else should?
Hi, Matt. Hi, John. Long-time listener, first-time caller. A little nervous. I'm sorry if that goes on. A little nervous with that. So I think that I was trying to put my thoughts into words here. Maybe you can kind of help me out a little bit as I'm going here. I would say that the reason that I believe in God is actually more of a fear. So I would say you could call it the fear of hell, or you could call it kind of a Pascal's wager, a combination of those two.
Sure.
In terms of, I think that I would totally agree with everything that you've said in so many of your talks and anything you said, that if God does exist, he's a piece of shit. Totally would agree with that. I think that the thing that keeps me believing, if you could call it that, is that maybe that God actually does exist, and maybe he just is a piece of shit. But I don't want to end up in hell, so I need to just go with it and believe, just because I don't want to end up in hell for eternity. That might be the best way.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to ask, like, which set of criteria, or how do you discern the set of criteria that keeps you out of hell?
I would say, like, that I believe. Well, I'm going to say that I believe in the God of the Bible, Jehovah, I guess you could say. So the reasons that would keep you out of believing in Jesus, et cetera, all that stuff. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it.
No, the problem is, which hell are you trying to avoid?
And that's the other point.
Why that particular hell? Why aren't you worried about the hells of other religions?
I would say that I don't know that we can prove any of them necessarily.
Right.
So it's almost just good.
But you're picking one, David. That's the thing. Despite I have no reason to think that any hell or any heaven that's ever been proposed by any religion is real and true. And because of that, I don't know which of those religions I should be afraid of, which hells I should be trying to avoid, which heavens I should be trying to attain. And I have no way of knowing what criteria will keep me out of any of those hells or send me to any of those heaven. And yet you seem to have picked one when I don't see a mechanism by which we could pick one.
Yeah, and I would say that's where the entire Pascal's wager thing of what I mentioned earlier, if I'm using that term correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm not.
You are, but I would say that how do you know that it is your particular Christian version of hell, which would be a denominational as far as I can tell? How do you know it's why are you protecting yourself against that particular version of hell? Why aren't you also similarly concerned about, let's say, the Zoroastrian version of hell? Zoroastrianism has a version of burning hell that you're sent to, in the afterlife if you don't follow Zoroaster. So do you also follow Zoroaster or any of the other religions? Like, just curious.
No, absolutely I do not. And I'd say that because some of that is, I would fully admit, it's because of where I've grown up. I grew up in the United States, where it's predominantly Christian. And I don't believe that you could have that. I believe that every God is mutually exclusive. So therefore maybe it's kind of a math bet. That's what I'm saying. The Pascal's wager thing. I was just saying that maybe I'll pick one and hope that the one that I have is the right one.
Okay.
And I believe that's probably faulty, but please explain to me.
Sure. So Pascal's wager, first of all, only compares a particular version of Christianity with the absence of any religion at all. It's completely a false dichotomy. And the reality is, if you are picking Christian hell number one to avoid, and you have no way to distinguish whether that one's more likely than Christian hell number 2, Christian hell number 7, Christian hell number 83, then your reasoning for seeking to avoid Christian hell number 1 is equally applicable to each of those other hells that you're not avoiding. And so the real math is, if each one of those has their own criteria for getting the good afterlife and avoiding the bad afterlife, if all of those have their different criteria, and you pick the wrong one, you're fucked. But if you pick none of them, you are either perhaps just as fucked, or it may be the case that there's a being who's not going to punish you for picking the wrong one. Maybe the test is, don't make a decision unless you have sufficient reason to warrant it. If there's a God that rewards intellectual integrity, I'm golden, because I genuinely sought gods, I genuinely investigated gods, and rather than saying, you know what, I'm just going to go with the one that I was raised to believe because that one's really popular and the people around me believe it, and you got to make a decision and I got to bet on one, so I'm just going to bet on this one. Instead of doing that, I said, no, that one I was raised with has no more evidence for it, no more reason to believe it than any of the rest of them. And I would rather not pick one and have the one that turns out to be right, if one of them does turn out to be right, explain to me how I did anything wrong, rather than saying, oh, you picked, because let's say there's 10 doors and behind 9 of the doors, there's a bad guy who's going to stab you in the face the second you open the door. And one of the doors leads on to an Elysian field of wonderful grass and perfect weather. Which door are you going to open? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10? And what's the reason? You don't have to answer that, because absent any information, all of those doors are equal to you. And what if it turns out that several of those doors don't have behind them what somebody said is behind them? If we have no way of deciding, why wouldn't the right decision be, I'm not picking a door?
And I would, I guess I would tend to agree with you there. I guess it's more so the way that I look at it is that I don't look at it as you're always saying, there are 1,000 different denominations of Christianity. I guess I don't necessarily look at it like that. I look at it as maybe it's Christianity versus Hinduism versus Islam.
How is that different? How is that different? Whether the 9 doors are 7 versions of Christianity, 1 version of Hinduism, or 2 versions of Christianity and 7 versions of Hinduism, it doesn't matter. It's the same.
Well, I would say that it changes you could say math in that scenario. If there's 3 things versus a million things, you have a better chance of picking one out of the 3 than you do the 1 out of a million.
Wow, you are exceptionally good at rationalizing, David.
I mean, I would say whatever number that you can come up with, it's always that number plus 1, because there's a chance that the God that does exist, if he does exist, we just haven't defined yet. So he could have some weird unknown criteria. Like you could have to, stand on your head on Sundays, and that's how you get into heaven, and nobody would know that. So everybody's just been going to hell the entire time.
But the thing is, what's wrong with not accepting any of them?
That, again, well, There's nothing wrong with it. I'll say that. Well, if there is something wrong with it, it would be that you could, like I said earlier, that you can maybe that the Christian God is right, and if you don't select it, then the reasons I've already stated, and you say that it's faulty, so that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, how do you, if you have no way of figuring out which proposed afterlife model is correct, then it would seem to me that it would always be a mistake to decide model 1 is the one I'm going with, as opposed to 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, when they are all mathematically equivalent. And you don't have any more evidence for 1 than 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6.
And that's there. I guess I would just say that we have more evidence, and I'm not going to say that we necessarily do, but I would, because I've grown up in a place that I think I've been kind of indoctrinated to believe that I have more evidence for the Jehovah God than I do for a God that values the logic, as you might have said earlier, or Islam, or something like that.
If you grew up in a house where everybody told you that left was right and right is left, wouldn't you have more evidence that left is right and right is left than someone who didn't grow up with that indoctrination?
Yeah.
Yeah. And does that in any way tell you what the right answer is?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So if we don't have the right answer, I can't make a decision.
Right.
Well, I'm kind of curious sitting here. Well, yeah, I'm still kind of curious as to why you, even though you acknowledge like everything that we've said here, why you still why do you still believe in God just to avoid the one particular version of hell? Or is that something that you're trying to work through?
That's something I'm trying to work through. It is. It's absolutely something I'm trying to work through right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I will call back. I have other topics that I could talk about, but I will have to wait another time for that. And I want to stay up all the time. Thank you for your help, guys.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Thanks for calling in. Well, heathens, that's going to be it for this call today. If you want more of this kind of content, you can hit up the links down in the description to go and subscribe to The Line here on YouTube. We're always producing great live content where we take callers from people. We're also adding new shows all the time. So please go down there, subscribe to The Line so that you can get more of this kind of content. I'm not sure if this was 20 seconds or anything like that, but yada, yada, yada. Jimmy, go fuck yourself.